Welcome to the Leaderish podcast with your hosts, Regina and Doris. Hey, Doris, how's it going?
Hey, Regina, it is going wonderfully well. I am so excited about our topic today, productivity. We have a wonderful guest that we're going to interview today on the podcast. And I know productivity is something that we can all improve on. No matter how good we think we are, there are going to be some tips and tricks, and we're going to hear some amazing advice from our guest, Cindy Sullivan, today. And I met her first as a speaker at a women's networking event about a year or so ago. And then we reconnected at another event. And I think when we both met her together, we instantly thought she would be a great guest on the podcast. And so we spoke with her, and we're super excited to have you here, Cindy. If you could please spend just a few minutes sharing a little bit about yourself and your background.
Absolutely. Thank you both for having me. I always enjoy the opportunity to come and talk time. Something I've been doing now for about 20 years, time management, organization, productivity. My tagline is organizing the time of your life. So all of those type of things I really enjoy getting a chance to chat about. So I'm excited to be here. My name is Cindy Sullivan, and my business is CB Sullivan Consulting and Organizing. I offer productivity and organizational coaching and consulting services. And as I said, I've been doing this now for about 20 years. I came out of the financial services corporate world is where I got my toes wet in this topic of productivity because I was in the training department and we wanted to obviously capitalize on the productivity of our management team and our staff there. And so that was the first time I really put some intentional thought around what it is to use time well. And I think it was the perfect time for me to hear that message, both personally as well as for my profession. Young mother, my son was like, I think a year old at the time I went through my first kind of real focused work on this. Relatively new to home ownership, growing my career, all of those things, when you just get beyond the scope of kind of, you can hold it all in your head and just, you got narrow enough focus, things start widening out in that part of your life. And so this idea of, wow, there's really strategies to capitalize on your time was really something I wanted to continue. Focus a couple of years later when the business that I was part of decided to sell off that line of business. I went through a layoff situation. And it really ended up being a gift because it was the opportunity for me to figure out, what do I want to do now? And I had enough time ahead of it happening that I could think about it. And time management, organization, and all of that is really something I wanted to stick with. So when I decided to start my business, I've now branched out and worked with many people in many different industries, professions, different levels of profession. And it's expanded my knowledge of productivity beyond just a certain approach or program, which is what we were teaching when I was in the corporate world, and really have come to develop some of my own ideas and framework around productivity because I spend a lot of time working with different people, helping them look at this resource of time and how they can better capitalize on it. So they're spending less time on minutia and more time on high value activities. So that's a little bit about me and my work. So yeah.
I love where you said, hold it in your head. And I can remember a time where I felt like I could hold everything in my head. I knew everybody's birthdays. Yeah. I knew everyone's doctor's appointments. I could hold it all in my head. And I'm not sure at what point in time that stopped working. And I realized
earlier
that
than you probably think, because our memory
so.
begins to change, right? I think it's either 30 or 35. I can't remember the exact change when our short-term memory and the things that we hold, and we've just got more that's in our past. The rearview mirror is getting full of all the stuff we've experienced. And that's when it starts to really decline. So we really need to come up with strategies because otherwise you'll be paddling until you just can't paddle anymore. You've got to come up with intentional ways to be on target with how you use your time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that Facebook reminds me when people's birthdays are.
Oh my gosh, yes. So true.
Regina, I started to interrupt you.
It dawned on me, like in the moment as Cindy was talking, as we get our heads fuller and fuller of all the things, and you talked about being a new mother and a homeowner, like everything that has happened over the last 12 to 15 years for me all came sweeping in with all of the things. And right now I've got an amazing client and I've got this huge project that I'm working on. So there's lots of great work there. Plus, our house is only 11 years old and it's falling apart. And so we're trying to manage all of that too. And the kids are in more and more events. There is so much happening in my world. And from time to time, I find myself just completely dropping balls. Not terribly often yet. And the reason is because I use some of your techniques that we'll talk about. So I really am excited to get into those so that we don't lose those important things and get caught up in the minutia and the things that aren't important.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know, Cindy, you created a framework. I know you wrote a book, and unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to read it. It's on my list to read. But you also have a free assessment. I know Regina and I both took your free assessment, which leads to knowing who we are and leads to you helping us as far as where our weaknesses are.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could maybe do a quick summary of that framework. And I know we want to dive into one particular area, but let's do a high level overview of the framework to get started.
Absolutely. And this all did come about from those experiences of working with clients. It's like I would explore one area with one person and then think that's really vital. Really tapping into your goals and making sure they're tied in is important. But somebody else was really dealing with just staying focused in the day. That's a very different set of skills. And yet somebody else in my work as a professional organizer was losing tons of time to just disorganization of their records, of their files, of their space. And so they're very different and unique. And what they're holding up is our ability to be productive. And for each of us, whatever productive means can look very different. Some people need to put lots in their time. Other people are just trying to spend less time, maybe working or doing things, and they just want high value. They want the right things. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it's really helpful when I work with clients and get a chance to talk with them and connect with them individually to find out specifically what that means for them. But for everyone, regardless of what your role is, regardless of your career, whether it's work or personal, these 6 areas I have found, they have all the skills, the tactics, the things to look at, the focus areas that keep us productive. And that's the 6 pillars framework. My book is The 6 Pillars of Productivity, Strategies to Organize the Time of Your Life. That's the name of it. And the assessment itself is the 6 pillars productivity assessment. And it's available to anybody that might want to take it. And we can put, I think the link, you said you can put that in the show notes.
We will,
So
yes,
it's,
definitely.
6 pillars productivity with the number 6, 6pillarsproductivity.com. for anybody who wants to do this. But the high level of what they are, these pillars that I find are important, is first off, planning. It's being intentional and forecasting out some intention with your time, not just being reactionary, but it's that proactive work of looking at what are the priorities and how do I lay them out. I call it the architecture of our time, in a way that makes sense. So that all falls in the first pillar. The second one is our internal time clock, which is that ability to sense the passage of time. There's some folks that really struggle with hyper-focus. They'll get into something and spend way too much time. There are other people who can't focus at all. Or you may be brand new to a role or to a project, let's say, and it's hard to forecast how long things take when they're not familiar. Or people multitask so much that they don't know how long one thing takes, but they know that juggling 10 of them at once will take me all week, right? But really have no way of. So how can you plan when you don't know? You can't really forecast appropriately. So very different skills around that. Third is our long range goals. So those could be personal goals. It might be projects that we're working on, but the bigger picture that we're striving for and how we drive that down into our day to day. So it's not just something you think about at the staff retreat, or not just something you say I'm going to do one day, but then never take steps towards another one. The fourth one, the one we're going to focus a little bit on today, is called leverage. And that is all of the tools, skills, techniques, or things that we need to manage well in order to leverage our self-management of our time. So it's where the rubber meets the road, like in your day-to-day, like what things hold us on track. So that is our ability to focus, our ability to manage distractions, which is something I think you guys talked about in your, let me look at my notes, weeding out the noise episode. So if somebody wants to go back, talked about all the things that pull us off track, right? They're things we have to manage in the moment. And 2 of those are going to be what we're going to focus on in today's call, which is perfectionism and dealing with procrastination. So those both are within that one pillar. So we're really taking a small chunk out of that one. Then we've got arrangement, which is how we organize our space and our information and our data so we can find it easily. And then our resources is the sixth pillar. That could be your tools, your planning system, your lists. For some businesses, it's their CRM because it's part of what holds together all of their activities and their plans. So that's a high level of the six. And they're all unique and different. And so if anybody wants to listen to that assessment, they can take that and it will give them a score in each of those areas. So we can flag the ones with the higher number will be the one that you might want to take a look at first, or that would be where I would explore with my clients to begin. So that's really a high level of all six of the pillars to consider. And you get a little information about some starting points for the one that might be your highest scoring pillar. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know when we talked, we had a pre-interview last week and I hadn't done the assessment yet. And we already knew that we wanted to focus on leverage. I assume, I don't know how ironic it was that when I took my assessment that was my highest score, was needing help in the leverage department. And so I was very excited to know that I feel like I'm getting a private coaching session from you, Cindy, since we're going to talk about leverage. And that's the area that I needed the most help on. And Regina, where did the assessment show you needed the most help?
Yeah, so leverage was number 2 for me. It was 10 out of 50. And then my top one was actually the internal time clock. So as Cindy was saying, like, how long do things take? I seem to underestimate time quite often for how long things take.
Yeah.
And then I end up going over the time and then I have to push other things out. Internal time clock was my number 1.
And for me personally, it's hard for me to take my own assessment, right? Because these are questions I developed. It's a little bit of a false score, I think, but knowing myself and knowing the ones that I tend to find myself needing to manage with more intention, I'm also in the leverage category, Doris. So see, we can be friends there. You mentioned the internal time clock, and that has come in of the years I've had my assessment, because I launched it probably about 8, maybe 9 years ago. I'll have to go back and look for that hard and fast date. But internal time clock is the one that shows up either in the top 1 or 2 for a majority of people, which is actually funny because it was the last one I added, because I have a really strong internal time clock. I can just sense time. I get a great idea of like how long things take, but I don't have a lot of variance. It's not that's a bad thing. It just can be also a product of somebody who does a lot of projects, right? If you're not in a very routine role, then that's very common. It's not right or wrong. It's a snapshot of where you are now and the things that are going on. But it's a great way to begin the conversation. And then there's a lot of strategies and stuff like that I cover in the book. But absolutely, I also welcome a chance to talk to people who take the assessment so I can give a little feedback and share a little bit more about them personally. So anybody that takes that, as well as you, Doris, and you, Regina, we can absolutely have an independent conversation and look at some of your results too. I'm happy to do that. But we are going to dive into
let's look at Doris's. Yeah, let's totally look at Doris's so everyone can get a feel for leverage and what this means. And I love it that we are also digging deep into perfectionism and procrastination within this, because I think those are the two most common challenges for women specifically. So I am very excited to dig into that with you guys today.
Yeah, we ready to roll up our sleeves and talk about this?
Yes.
Yes.
And I will say personally, I am not a perfectionist. I know it's more important for me to get something done than to have it be perfect. So I'm okay with things I still want them to be perfect, but not to the point of delaying. If it needs to be done, if I have a time clock or a deadline and it needs to be done at midnight on some date, it's going to be done on midnight by some date. It's not going to be over because it's not perfect, but I'm going to try to get it as perfect as I can and meet the deadline.
Right. Yeah.
So things like grammar mistakes. I hate when I discover that something has a grammar mistake in it after it's been posted or after it's been written. And I hate that.
Yeah, we all have those little tendencies and perfectionism. And it's interesting, I was thinking about this after we chose, because we could talk about productivity. There's so many different components, right? That's why it's really helpful to break it down into 6 areas. But we could talk all day about any one of the pillars. And so picking 2, interestingly, as we looked at perfectionism and procrastination, I started thinking they're really a different end of the spectrum, because perfectionism is all about over effort, and procrastination is about under effort. So over and under, it's like too much, too little, right? Of how much time and attention we're putting into those 2 things, really.
Yeah. And I will confess that I am a procrastinator. I think the joke is I'm a card carrying member of the Procrastination
Oh,
Association.
yeah. Well, it's the
And
biggest.
I do sometimes wait until the very last minute, but I always know I never miss a deadline.
Yeah.
I know how much time it's going to take. Sometimes I just wait until the last day
Right.
to get something
Right.
done.
I think that when we think about procrastination, the root cause is almost not knowing how to get started and or creating a false sense of energy to get something done, right? Perfectionism, I feel like sometimes the root cause of that is fear of failure or not wanting to fail. So the beginnings of both of those challenges are different, and how that shows up with us also is different, but commonly I do find that they go together quite a bit. You procrastinate because you want the jolt of energy, and then your perfectionist kicks in, and then you spend all of this time working late into the evening or whatever because you have the energy and then you want to make it perfect.
And perfectionism can lead to procrastination because you're waiting to get all the things you need to research all the topics, to do the gather it. And so a
Very
lot of
true.
times that's what the result is. Perfectionism is, it can lead to that. So absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think coaching in the area of productivity is something that I find so fascinating, because you really have to do some digging and some learning. It's not just about throwing in some tactics, and I'm definitely going to go over some strategies for you, but there's a lot of learning that we do in coaching that then equips you to help get past the challenges themselves. And that's the work I find just interesting, because I think our productivity, each of us, it's as unique as our fingerprints. Right. So two people could be doing the exact same job, and the challenges they find because they've got different skill sets, they've got different tendencies in the way they work or the ways they think. I just find it fascinating. So it's a topic that, yeah, I just love talking about it. Yep. Let's dive into one. Let's start with perfectionism. And I think then we'll lead to the procrastination. All my P's, I'm going to stumble over all these P words. Perfectionism, it's a natural tendency toward the good. So it's well intentioned. So it seems to be a positive thing we're getting. Yet have pretty much they've uncovered the fact that there's a lot of downside to perfectionism. But I think it is worth each of us looking at for those areas that we might tend to be perfectionist about, if we are a perfectionist. We probably all have it crop up sometimes. There's something like, what is it we get? So maybe I can just throw this out to you, Regina, and to Doris. What is it we get when we pull off perfect? What happens?
Oh, well, we get rewarded. We get recognized for our amazing work. We may not have to rework that work. Perfectionism is awesome, right?
It rocks. Yeah. When we pull it off, we are like Superwoman. Superman, if
Well, yeah.
we're just we have superpowers, right? Because we get something from it. And that's why I think it's important for us to understand when we do it, what are we getting? Because I can tell you all the downsides of it, which I am going to tell you because it's a good reminder for all of us to hear. But until you get behind what it is you're getting from it, because you are getting something from it if you continue to do it. It may be validation from your clients. You may think, oh, I'm gonna look better than my competition. If you are out there, it may be that it's appeasing my own anxiety around my fears or my imposter syndrome. Whatever the case may be, it's worth going, what is the benefit of perfectionism? If you find yourself being a perfectionist, what am I getting from it? Because it's important, because we'll highlight some of the things that are the downside. Obviously, we're talking about time here. So the biggest component in both of these is the time impact it's going to have. We spend way too much time. There are different studies, so I didn't pull tons of statistics around this because you'll find similar but competing, so I'll give you general information. But the effort it takes to move something from excellent to perfect, it far outweighs what you've probably spent on the entire project itself, right? So more than 50% of our effort is in there doodling. Now you might be thinking, there's certain things I've done all this work, and to make it perfect is not quite that much. So again, don't hold me fast to this, but just understand for many things when they've studied this, it looks like you can add anywhere from 25 to 50% onto the amount of time you spend on something because you're aiming for perfect. Now, there are times when we want to aim for as close to perfect as possible. And I wish I tried to trace this back to its source of origin, but all I can find online as I've scouted around is it's a common theme out there. So I'll use this. When you're strapping on your parachute, you want to know that the person who packed that parachute did the job perfectly. You don't want to find out that they skimped on time. Um, but how many things are parachutes that we're working on? So I think we need to think about
Yeah,
that.
not very many.
Yeah.
The question that I have on perfectionism, is there such a thing as being perfect? Because I think moving from excellent to perfect, that could be very subjective on what
Yes.
perfect is.
Right.
And a lot of people who are perfectionists, it will never be there. There is always room for improvement. So they could spend, like you said, 25 to 50% more time on going from excellent to, and maybe in their minds, it never moves beyond excellent. But now they've spent 25 to 50% more time moving from one version of excellent to another version of excellent. But in their minds, it's never really perfect.
Yes, and good point. So the time itself that it's taking is way, way too far. But interestingly, as I was thinking about this whole topic in preparation for today, I realized perfect is a zero margin of error. So there's no error. We're aiming for this. Yet the very idea of defining the work I'm going to do as perfect is the most vague definition of what you're, and I just thought that's really interesting. Zero margin of error with absolutely zero parameters. That's the general thing we're aiming for in perfect. If I'm aiming to be perfectly healthy, what does that mean? It could mean somebody eats, it could be exercising, it could be my mental health, it could be stopping smoking or eating vegetarian lifestyle. I mean, there's no parameters around just perfect by itself. And so part of solving that dilemma, I think, is one of our strategies, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So you're very right. So all of that effort is not only time, but it's our health. That's another thing that costs us when we are perfectionists. I'm glancing down here at some data that I pulled up. The American Psychological Association says that 70% of people who define themselves as perfectionists experience anxiety and depression. 70%.
I believe
right?
that.
So that's leading back to, we know what's at the root of this, not good stuff. 33% of those perfectionists tend to have higher risk of burnout. That was from the Frontiers on Psychology. It's an increase in cortisol, which is that stress hormone, right? Which we know all the downsides of stress. These folks are perfectionists, tend to be 2 times more likely to be micromanagers when you're talking to leaders here. So those tendencies are out there, and there's a reason why, because there's this idea of I'm going to get perfect in my brain and make sure that everyone else does it that particular way. Increases sleep problems, digestive issues, stress, all of those things we've talked about. We know there's a good side because that's what keeps us doing it. We're getting a payoff from it, but it's just highlighting again, this is why we're coming back to this. And we know it in our brains, sometimes it's hard to be reactive. So I think one of the first things as we move into thinking about some strategies to deal with perfectionism is we have to go behind the word itself and understand that. Both to understand what I mentioned earlier, what's behind it, but look for trends. And this is where, again, the coaching comes in helpful because we have these conversations regularly when I'm meeting with my clients. So each of you as listeners you'll just be relying on your memory. Look back and think about, are there any areas that you find yourself susceptible to being a perfectionist? You may not want to title yourself as a perfectionist, but even my chances are, I'm thinking, Doris, that you probably have some things that you lean into being more perfect on than others, or trying to. For me, it's anything that I'm going to put out there in a marketing front. I tend to really want to be a perfectionist, and I stumble over that because I'll tend to not be able to get that perfect visual or perfect infographic, or I'm waiting. I've got some marketing out there with headshots I had taken. I've shared this with Doris and Regina, had headshots taken right before I went through cancer treatment. So now I don't look like that person, and it has bugged the daylights out of me. So there's some perfectionism going on there, but I can't let myself not get out there because of that. Do you guys have any areas that you see trends in perfectionism, maybe in the work that you do? Don't want to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, I'm happy to be put on the spot here. First of all, I consider myself a recovering perfectionist, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And for years I was adding in the extra 50% of effort. And I was doing that because I wanted the recognition for my work being excellent, which excellence is my number one value. And what I realized that it was my imposter syndrome, my inner critic, my whatever, my saboteurs coming out and saying, Regina, you can't do anything less than the best because it's a felony if you're a vanilla ice person. And what I realized that actually that first 50% was excellent. And it was that second 50% that did not actually make or break the work. And when I stopped doing that, I still got the recognition. I still was doing a good job, but I was managing my time better. And it made a ton of difference in my life. Now, to your point, there are still areas where I believe that I still have some of that anxiety and want to be the best of the best, but I think it's less now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very true. And I think it segues right into what we'll talk about strategies in a moment. And there's a great quote about perfectionism. It's attributed to Maria Shriver. She stated, "Perfectionism doesn't make you feel perfect. It makes you feel inadequate." And I thought that's really important because once you hit that tipping point, it's that excellence is great. It's not bad. It's wanting to do good work. It's not a character flaw. It's really just looking at the economy of the investment of time toward how much payoff is there. And there will be times when adding that extra 50% might be valid, but not always. So really just that, because you want to understand, where are we enough? Where is it enough for the project at hand or the task at hand?
That's the big question. Where is enough? Where is excellent? What version of excellent is enough?
And that's a wonderful segue. So let me get right into some strategies. So I tried to limit strategies because, again, this isn't a 5-hour podcast. We're trying to keep it on target. So I think the first strategy I have for anyone where they start to see a trend in perfectionism, and again, don't think I'm just going to wipe all perfection. None of us we always are going to have those tendencies. That's fine. Pick one area where you see a trend. And when you have a project going on, maybe it's not a category of work, maybe it's who's asking you to do it. Maybe it's the things that your clients ask or your boss asks or whatever the case may be. Wherever that trend is, when you are going to head into some kind of project, activity, task, go ahead and before you pick up the pencil, open the Word doc, start the work, look in, define excellence, define done. So if you can start putting let me just write down, even if it's just notes nobody else is going to see. If I am supposed to research options, and my goal will be, I'm just using this as an example, I'm going to research the top 3 options, and I'm going to have all these out. Here's what it's going to look like when it's done. Here's what it's going to accomplish. You might need to think about who's the recipient of this work. Is this something going to a colleague? Is it something going to a client? Something that you're going to speak at a conference of 50,000 people? And those are different payoffs. So they deserve different amounts of time. So think about all of that and define what done looks like. Now, this can also be really helpful when you tend to be a perfectionist around tasks that somebody else has either requested of you or maybe assigned to you. This is a great way to go back and dialogue around what needs to happen. What's the end result? Because sometimes perfectionist tendencies are, I'm not clear on where done is, so therefore I'll just run 5 miles down the road with this project because I'll surely catch what I needed to get done. When really somebody might say, really, this is preliminary, this is a draft document. Having that conversation, asking lots of questions to define done can be, okay, who's going to get this? Begin to dialogue around what does this need to look like? How much time do you want me to invest in this? That could be another amount of time too, because it may be that I need this back tomorrow. Obviously, it's not going to get to perfect if it's a tomorrow thing and you could spend 72 hours researching it. So you've got to understand the parameters. So that's one of the first strategies. Find the places where you are susceptible to this and define done, or define what it is to be done excellently. If it's not just the first phase of something, it's an end product, then what does excellent look like? So that you know when you've hit that mark, because you really aren't going to be able to tell if we give ourselves 0 error margin and a vague parameter. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
It makes complete sense. And it is so often that we don't define what does success look like when we're working on a task or a project. And then we go all out instead of meeting the need.
Right. And over deliver and asking those questions. So even if I'm going to get back to a client or a prospective client, let's say on something, and I've agreed I'm going to send them some information, I can send you a high level review and have that hopefully sooner, but no later than 48 hours. Is that fine? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, it's absolutely fine. And all of a sudden I don't have the pressure to not close up shop in my office and go spend time with my family because I've said I'd do this, and so I need to do it now. It might have been fine 48 hours, right? If you over deliver, then that's great. So, but I still don't want to spend too much time on it. That's the idea of defining what done and defining excellence. I think that's a great strategy to have. We recognize and begin to catch ourselves when we go beyond that. Two simple ones. So these are easier. Establish guidelines along the done. Give yourself some time parameters. So set a deadline if you don't have it, or say, I'm going to spend X amount of time. I'm going to spend this one afternoon. I'm going to come up with 3 options, not 100. That's like a guideline, similar to defining done, but giving yourself some rigid containers for how much time and effort you're going to spend on it. And then lastly is practicing imperfection. If you're a perfectionist, take something that's low risk and begin walking out of the room before something is done that way. So you just have to get used to working through that feeling of it's not done, but I'm coming back, and you know what? It was fine that I left that undone. Or it's fine that I didn't proofread for the 3rd time that draft email I was sending to somebody. So try to throw in a few times and give yourself a little opportunity to be imperfect. And I think you'll find that it's not so bad coming out the other side of that.
I feel like she was talking to you in the example of the 3rd proofread. Did you feel that?
I was thinking about you, Regina, as a recovering perfectionist. But you figured this out, that you probably did some of that and practiced imperfection in your recovering perfectionism.
Well, it's funny because every time I send out an email that has a typo, the first one to respond back is Doris when I do my weekly broadcast. And she's like, hey, you had a typo. I'm like, yeah, too late now.
Yeah, it happens, right? So weighing that thing. So hopefully that's given you a few strategies that are really practical and your listeners can use as they step into that. We've definitely covered a lot about perfectionism. So but perfectionism, as we mentioned earlier, can also lead to procrastination, right? Because we've made this such a huge job. We want to get into the other one, the under effort of our 2 topics today, to talk about delay. And like you mentioned earlier, you talked about actually just activating on the task. Regina, you mentioned that. And I'm going to give you some strategies for how to just do the thing. There's a few things that are helpful to throw in there as well. And I got another quote. Procrastination makes easy things hard and hard things harder. I think the name was like Mason Cooley. It was not a name that was familiar to me. So procrastination makes easy things hard and hard things harder. And I think we know that in our brain, but still, sometimes it's just not enough to make us do the thing. So what's going on? What's costing us when we procrastinate? Well, there's lots of great statistics out there too. If we need to convince ourselves, usually guilt is the big thing. We really feel bad about it. There are financial implications when we procrastinate. Bills don't get paid, late fees, or you miss that client opportunity because you didn't act on sending them information or reaching out, whatever the case may be. There are many people say that one statistic, I'm glancing here at my notes, 88% of people, this was a study done by Darius Rowe, I'm thinking that's maybe a French name, I'm not sure, is that 88% of people spend 1 hour a day procrastinating. So that's a lot of time. If I could get 5 extra hours in my week, I'd be like, how do I do it? Stop procrastinating. So I thought that was a really great one, because it's so important that we really take a look at, again, what's going on behind the surface. So when I sit down with a client, we're dealing with procrastination, we're seeing some trends on things that, or for the 3rd or 4th week in a row, it's like, no, I didn't do that thing, even though they said it was simple. I've got all I need to do. I'll just hang up from our conversation and I'll do the thing. And 3 weeks later, it's still going forward. So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on? There's something behind it. There's something else that's happening. And the tendency is to think it's me. But is it you or is it the task? That's what I like to look at. Let's flip it around a little bit. Let's look at what is it about that task, because it depersonalizes it. And it's a lot of times it is about the task. There's 3 things that lead to us. If it's a task-based procrastination, it's either because there's some unknowns there, like maybe you don't have the training to get on that system, or you don't have the information you need yet. There's something unknown. There's something that's just yuck, unpleasant. You don't want to do it. It's just not a fun thing to do. Or it's complex and it's hard. And all of those cause us to stop. So sometimes just acknowledging, gosh, I always tend to procrastinate that. What is it about it? So we'll start by looking at what is the thing you're procrastinating. Is it one of those things? Now, it can also be something internal. There could be something like perfectionism going on. It's not the task is hard. There's something that I'm fearful about, or something I'm afraid if I don't do it perfectly, there's going to be some kind of blowback. So those are internal avoidance things, but it's important to distinguish that. What's happening. And something else I should have said earlier is it's important to distinguish what's procrastination from what's not, because we tend to internalize and say it's me for procrastinating, when really Procrastination is really about intentional delay of an action. We're not taking it on purpose, and there's some detrimental side effect of not taking it. But if your week is like mine, I can plan it out, and there are almost always things that I have to decide in the moment when I'm actively managing my time and myself. This doesn't need, this other thing has to come first. This can go to tomorrow. I don't consider that procrastination. And I think a lot of people just go, well, I had to move it, so therefore it's on me. I'm a procrastinator. No, that's active time management. And you would have gone back and made the same choice again. So a lot of times I'm reminding my coach, was that a decision you would go back and make again? And sometimes they're like, well, yeah, I had this opportunity come up, or my manager came in with a client crisis and now we needed, you absolutely would have done it. So let's take that piece off the table because there's already enough guilt associated.
Phew. Okay. I'm not a procrastinator. No.
Well, I'm laughing.
No, that's not true. But
No,
I
you're
do.
not. That's right. See, I thought this would.
I have done some of that, but I have an example, and maybe you can help analyze this example because I do consider it procrastination. And first of all, I want to thank Regina because she started, I feel like I'm following in her footsteps on some of the things that she has done. The first one is a weekly blog or newsletter. So I started about a year ago and I was going to do it once a month. And that kind of went by the wayside. I think I did it once or twice and then I missed 2 or 3 months. And then Regina started doing it weekly using LinkedIn. And I think one of the reasons that I didn't do it as regularly, I thought, no one's reading this. And when she said, well, I started doing it on LinkedIn and I have all these subscribers. And so I started committing to doing a weekly blog/newsletter. But where the procrastination comes in is I had wanted to move it to an email version of the newsletter for months and months and months. And I kept putting it off. I finally got it done. Don't have a lot of subscribers. I'm trying to move from LinkedIn to the email. But how would you analyze that or help me overcome something like that where and maybe that was a little bit of a fear, like I knew I had to do some research on how to do it. I wanted to do it through my website and through the CRM that I have available on my website. And I learned how to do it. I finally did it. And so now I'm doing that on a weekly basis. But would you consider that procrastination? And what could I have done differently to maybe start that newsletter sooner rather than later?
If it's something that was like to your detriment, again, that's procrastination. But I see that as being one of those, there's a component of the task. You had several things. You're like, I had to learn how to do it on LinkedIn. I had to, some of those unknowns. There were some definite things that cause barriers. And it'll tie in. We rehearse this because I think the next strategy we're going to move into helps a little bit with that because it's about how do you just activate and do the things. So procrastination, were you losing out on, did you have less benefit because you delayed it? Or did you always make choices because I'm not sure how to do this? So it may have just been structurally you weren't addressing really the activity because a lot of times I think we see the action as hit send, but there's about 50 steps leading up to that. So we dissected that into a little bit. If you were my coaching client, we'd definitely be talking about the task, but I'd also be tying into your goal of doing that. How are you connected with the desire to do that? Is it really seated in something you want to do or not? And so that's a big piece of it too. I mean, you can delay on something, but if it's not really, you're doing it because it's a should or a perceived thing you need to be doing, then maybe that's more of the issue. It's more in that goals pillar perhaps than it would be the others. There's some stuff to unwind, but I think it's a good delay. There's a lot about the task itself because it sounds like now that you've cleared those barriers and you're doing it, it's not something that got procrastinated. But it's a good example of how we have to unravel some of these little trends. And that's why it's so helpful to have regular conversations with coaching clients because we get to talk through some of that and really get behind it. And a lot of times people end up feeling a lot better because they were giving themselves, they just took on the guilt of I'm a procrastinator because the thing didn't get done. At the beginning of the week, I said I want to do the thing. At the end of the week, you look back and if your only litmus test was I did all the things on my list that I said I wanted to do. I think we can be pretty successful in our life with other measuring tools than that being the only thing. And so I think it helps people feel a little better about it and motivated to do it. So there's maybe some procrastination, but there were probably some other things going on as well.
Yeah.
Moving into task activation. How do we actually do the thing? Because we'll line up all the things and get all the knowledge, make it really easy, and it's still sometimes hard for people to activate. I think that's one of the big strategies on things we tend to procrastinate, things we tend to put off, maybe whatever the reason. We don't like doing them, we don't have the information. We need to do, there's a few things that you can do, and I'm going to review several of these tactics. So one is the 1 minute rule. So this is an idea of literally, sometimes we take these little tasks that in of themselves can take a minute to do, but we think, oh, I'll just set that aside and we'll do it later. It's much harder to activate on a 1 minute task later because number one, you got to think about it again. And so then it's in your head every time you see that piece of paper or think about that person and you didn't do that 1 minute task. It just takes up space, takes up head space, takes up time to go back and recreate it. So a great way to not procrastinate is just give yourself that guideline. If it's something I can handle in a minute, unless I literally have to walk out the door for some kind of crisis or meeting to be on time or whatever, do the 1 minute tasks as they are. So we just make that rule for ourselves and we activate. So that's an easier way to activate. But a lot of times we don't do the work because we've perceived it in our brain that it's bigger than it is. And we do that in a couple of different ways. One is we give ourselves the send newsletter is on our task list, whether that's internal, a list, whatever format you have. But there's a lot behind it. So breaking things down to the next basic step. So if you tend to procrastinate on something, doesn't mean you have to do it for every item, but for those things you really struggle to get going, write down the very next smallest thing you can do. Because chances are, once you're a body in motion, what will happen? You stay in
You'll
motion.
stay in motion.
Continue. You'll stay in
Right.
motion.
Right. You need to activate. I say it's like stepping over the door frame. And when we fail to procrastinate, in our mind, it's a 4-foot step up, that first step. So I'm always telling people, let's take things that will bring the barrier down so it's just really easy to either step over or step through the door frame. So one thing is to give yourself the next smallest step. Another technique is to schedule it. Get it on your calendar or do it first thing. If you've heard of that book, Eat That Frog, that's a book. It's been around for quite a while, but it's the idea. If you have to do something unpleasant in your day, it's something it may not be something, but again, something you're procrastinating, it's best to do it first. I've known folks where their best time to do things is not first thing in the day, but for a lot of us, that's our freshest. It's also, we haven't made as many decisions in our day because decision fatigue is real and you're more susceptible to procrastination when you've got decision fatigue because your brain is looking at every item you've got to do and it sees the 4-foot step, not the little one. So you break it down, just try to do it at a time when you don't have to think about it. So that might mean just getting it on your calendar, thinking about, for some people that I work with, they have days when a lot of their staff works remote. And so for them, they're less likely to procrastinate if they can put it in a time in their schedule when their surroundings work better for them. So it can look different for everybody, and that's an individual conversation. But you get the idea. Place it in time somewhere out there that makes sense, where you won't be more susceptible to the distractions that make it really easy to push aside these things. And another one that I'll give you, and again, there's many tactics we could use if we were talking one-on-one and individual coaching, but a big one that's been helpful for me is a mantra of aim to start, don't aim to finish. Doesn't mean you won't finish, but a lot of people think, again, putting a task means, oh gosh, that's going to take me an hour. So that automatically makes that threshold 4 feet rather than just stepping over it. So if we can say, okay, I'm just going to start the newsletter. I'm just going to start that email. I'm going to plug in the email address. And chances are that the body in motion will stay in motion. So those are all ways we can better activate on tasks. There's other techniques, but I tried to narrow it down for you. But those are some that make it a little simpler for my clients, usually to take that first step, lower that barrier so it doesn't look as overwhelming.
Wow, Cindy, amazing techniques that you have shared with us for both procrastination and perfectionism. And we really appreciate that. I know that you listening right now, you have at least got 3 things on your list that you want to try today. Doris, what have you put on your list that you want to try today?
I think the idea to just get started, to break things down into smaller steps is so important because I think sometimes that's exactly what we do is we look at the entire project as one big thing where we can very easily break it down into 5 or 10 chunks, and let's work on every one of those chunks individually. Put those down as different to-dos on your to-do list so we can still check them off. Because we've talked about that before, where we love
so much
checking off
gratification.
things. So much gratification.
Endorphins.
So if we can just chunk it down, that gives us 10 check marks in our to-do list rather than just one check mark on that big old project.
Yeah, and I heard two things there, I think, Doris. The first one is just get started. Step over that threshold, right?
Yes.
It's a 6-inch threshold, not a 4-foot threshold. And then the second thing I heard was list out all of those things. Like the email, it seems like the one thing that Cindy said was you just got to hit send, but there's 20 things to do before that and 20 things to learn before that. And so if you have that path set out for you, it's definitely beneficial. I'm going to add one about the perfectionism because it did hit me. I know I am reforming, but there are still times where I will give that extra effort. So for me, I felt it very helpful to really think about what done looks like and to, as Brene says, paint done. But if you can actually take a few moments before you begin to think about what is the expectation, what does done look like, what does excellent look like, and it doesn't have to be perfect, then that to me is just a game changer. So those were a couple of things that stood out for us. Gosh, we are really interested in what stood out for you today as you're listening. We would love for you to email Doris or I, or email Cindy directly. What a bang up job today on this episode. We'll have Cindy's contact information in the show notes, including her assessment, which both Doris and I took, and we're slightly obsessed with it. So if you will take a few minutes, it takes about 7 minutes to do, go to Cindy's website, take that assessment. You can even schedule for all of our listeners a complimentary session with Cindy to go over your results, which Cindy, that is so kind. Thank you for doing that for our amazing listeners. And we hope they take you up on that because absolutely phenomenal to offer that. Well, guys, this is about all we have for today. What a huge and amazing and wonderful episode we have brought you. And we hope that you loved it and loved talking with Cindy as much as we did. You can find, again, all of those links in the show notes, and you can follow us in all things Leaderish on all of the socials. And again, we say it every time, but if you liked this episode, share it. Share it with a friend. It's wonderful for us if you share the episode, but also you're gifting your friend the new knowledge that you've stumbled upon here today. We'd also love a review. So if you'll give us one of those 5-star reviews, and oh my goodness, would you even leave a comment? That would be great. This is also our second episode that we've put on YouTube. Holy cow, I can't believe I just said that out loud. We didn't even tell you last episode because we were so nervous about it. So this is our second episode that we're putting on YouTube, so you can go back and watch that first YouTube episode. And we would also love for you to like and subscribe on YouTube and comment. We're trying to get the algorithm to figure out that we're like real humans here. So if you'll take care of that too. And we just love to hear from you. You can email us at leaderishpodcast@gmail.com. All right, ladies, that is about it for today. I'm going to finish us off with a big old cheers.
Cheers.
Hey.